It's great to be here. Thank you very much for the opportunity to be here and share. Paul has already thanked Bill and Vinny for me, so I will just go ahead and thank Paul for a great weekend, a great meal, great hospitality, great being able to hang out with everyone. It's been a great opportunity to think about what I would say this morning. Think about how my life can speak into your life. And I think we should begin with that now and then piece. I mean, those are some serious Photoshop skills. I'll take it back just a little bit further. I began acting at 5 years old. I also began riding a bike much younger than that. I started acting at 5 years old as a kid in commercials. My father and mother were in Dallas, Texas at the time. And we were walking down the street one day. And it's literally one of those stories out of a book. Someone comes up to me and says, "Hey, how would you like to be in a commercial?" Not to me, to my mom, obviously. How would you like to be in a commercial? And from there on, it wasn't quite as meteoric as you would have heard, but had a great run. Worked professionally for about 10, 15 years. In commercials, TV, theater, film. I spent about 10 years on a soap opera called Love of Life in New York City. I spent time working with people like Henry Fonda, Lee Remick, Jason Robards, Betty Davis, Tony Curtis, and Walter Matthau, as you have seen. I had a great time on the Bad News Bears, played one of the infielders, third base in the first movie, first base in the second and third movie. If anybody remembers the hidden ball trick in the Houston Astrodome, yours truly. It was a great joy to be able to do that. Some of the memorabilia that I put together, my mother wasn't quite a hoarder, at least she wasn't diagnosed as a hoarder before that became famous, but she was very good at collecting some memorabilia. This is all stuff they were going to throw out on the set one day. And my mom said, "Oh, you're not throwing that out. You're going to ship that to New Jersey." And so this is some of the memorabilia that I have from the film that's actually on display at a little San Fernando cultural museum in California right now. By the time I moved to New Jersey, the acting bug had kind of taken root. I started commuting into the city at about 11 or 12 years old. My mom used to drive me in for auditions and things like that earlier. But eventually I was taking the train by myself, worked steadily for a long, long time. Instead of doing recess and kickball with kids, I was sharing a dressing room with a guy named Chris Reeve. I don't know if that rings a bell. He and I shared a dressing room on Love of Life. During the first Bad News Bears, we shared a production lot with people from Happy Days and Laverne and Shirley. I promised somebody a picture of Charlie's Angels the other day. This is the Bad News Bears with Charlie's Angels. And as I mentioned earlier, we got to work in the dugout of the Houston Astrodome, which is great, a place that doesn't even exist anymore. But we had some great memories there. But I would have to say, if I had to pick a favorite memory, my favorite memory would be almost killing Henry Fonda. It may not be hard to figure out how I almost killed Henry Fonda, because I'm 13 years old behind the wheel of a truck. I had to learn to drive for this movie, and we learned on a Volkswagen camper. It was a stick shift. I'm 12, 13 years old, and I learned how to drive in the parking lots down at the baseball fields near my house. When you audition, they say, "Hey, can you drive?" And what do you say? "Of course I can drive. Who can't drive?" Then as soon as you get the part, you go learn how to drive. Well, as you might be able to tell, that is a truck with no power steering, and I had very short legs. So I had 1 foot on a brake, 1 foot on a clutch, and Henry Fonda had this cane on the gas. Not kidding you. We're at the top of a hill of a driveway of a house, big semicircular driveway. The scene called for me to drive down the driveway and make a really sharp right-hand turn. Well, to the immediate left of the driveway was a huge oak tree. And the way I heard the story, it was best told from behind the camera. because I'm working the clutch and the brake and he's working the gas. And I would pull down that driveway, and sure enough, they were saying, I don't think he's going to make it. No, he's going to do it. No, I don't think he's going to make it. I didn't make it. Smack into a tree. Literally, the fender wrapped around the tree. You've heard that expression. Literally wrapped around the tree. I've got Henry Fonda, living legend, almost a dead legend, right next to me. Was a great opportunity, though, to have Henry Fonda say, oh, don't worry about it, Dave. You're a good driver. You'll be fine. Don't worry. This won't go on your record. I didn't even have a record yet. One of my favorite pictures from my days as a Bad News Bear is this picture right here. And you may not know why yet. We were probably in Hollywood doing some promotion for the Bad News Bears. And I have a feeling that this picture was taken in order to hopefully get the Hollywood sign in the background. This is, if you've been to LA, there's a hotel right on Hollywood Boulevard there. And for me, this illustrates the shift from my movie career to my ministry career. Because 30 years after this picture was taken, I would spend almost a decade working at that church. That is Hollywood United Methodist Church, and when I was going through a pile of pictures at my mom's house, my jaw dropped. This is maybe one of the favorite pictures that I own. My acting career started to wind down, and my faith journey began to wind up when I started attending a junior high youth group at a church in northern New Jersey called Long Hill Chapel. I have a lot of great memories of that time. It was a great place to be. And it's where my call to ministry actually began, specifically when the people from my church, and especially my youth pastor, did an amazing job of supporting my family when my father passed away. I was 14 years old, and he was 46. And I preached just this past Sunday on Mother's Day, that Mother's Day oftentimes is about flowers and brunch and presents, but for a lot of folks, Mother's Day isn't that big of a deal. Or it's a sad and painful time. And for me, it's Father's Day. Father's Day just isn't a thing for me. Because other than a couple baseball games and some help with homework, I don't remember much time with my father. So your words about what fathers say to their kids, or how we father other people in our lives if we don't have kids, was a very, very appropriate piece of help and instruction. This was also the time when a very good friend of mine from the church, who had graduated also from Messiah College and was in Philadelphia studying for the ministry, invited me to go to seminary with him and spend some time with him. Him and his family, he was sort of a big brother to me during this time. And it was those two events, different two events, but those two events that the ministry of my youth pastor and that visit to a Philadelphia seminary formed to me the foundation of my call to ministry. My call to ministry wasn't necessarily crystal clear at that time. It wasn't detailed, but it was certainly there. God had a very specific hold on me. Went to Messiah College, took a job after graduation as a campus minister with an organization called the Coalition for Christian Outreach. Served as a campus minister for a year. Had a wonderful intro to ministry job, working with young adults, sort of my first introduction to ministry. But a few years after that, I found myself attending and then eventually pastoring a young adults group at Mendham Hills Chapel, another Christian and Missionary Alliance church, much like the one I grew up in and the one that Dave and I graduated from, the Seminary Alliance Theological Seminary. And this church is where I first fell in love with traditional parish ministry, with church work. I went on from that job to receive my MDiv, and two things happened during my time at seminary. I began to get a much clearer sense of the direction and my call to ministry, which oddly enough would not be in that particular denomination. And the flip side of that is because of an internship I had in seminary that would eventually turn into a full-time job, a full-time opportunity for ministry, would also be where I met my wife, Becky. the young adult ministries of our respective churches would come together to start an evening service over 20 years ago. We put a band together. Becky was the singer. I would preach and play drums. And eventually we fell in love and got married. And we called our service Common Ground, because we knew that even though we were coming from two very different churches, very different church backgrounds, that the doctrine was different, the worship style was different. We knew something very important that you guys know here as well. It's clear that you guys know it as well. That what unites us is much, much stronger than what divides us. It's also here where Becky and I created and discovered and adapted our approach to and philosophy of ministry. There are two separate passages, you've heard them this morning, that speak to and represent everything that we stand for. And what I love about these passages, Dave, is that the best part about the Luke and the Mark passage is on two very separate occasions. Jesus was asked two very different questions that both elicited the same response from Jesus. In Luke 10, Jesus is asked by a teacher of the law. Any lawyers in the house today? Any lawyers around? Okay, good. Good to know the lawyers are here, because they made this question happen. What is the thing I must do to inherit eternal life? The lawyer says to Jesus. And like a good lawyer, turns the question around and says, well, what is written in the law? How do you read it? And he responds with this. That's Shema. Love the Lord your God with all of your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. You have answered correctly, Jesus replied. Do this and you will live. The text goes on to say that the lawyer wants to justify himself and says, well, who is my neighbor? Who is my neighbor? And Jesus then proceeds to tell the parable of the Good Samaritan. That's the context. And this is a great reason why the book of Luke, the Gospel of Luke, is my favorite. The second encounter that elicits this same response from Jesus is in Mark's Gospel. Mark's Gospel, chapter 12, there it's called the Great Commandment. And it's a different question, but the same answer. One of the Pharisees stands up and asks Jesus, of all the commandments, which one is the most important? And Jesus answers this, the most important one, says Jesus, is this: you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second is this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no greater commandment than these. And what I love most about this version of the passage is that Jesus is asked of all the commandments, and I'm not sure which all they're talking about. You know, there was 10 commandments that we all know, but there's also 613 commandments that Judaism tried to observe. Of all the commandments, which one is the greatest? And he says this, the first one is this: love God with your heart, soul, mind, and strength. The second is like it, love your neighbor as yourself. Jesus was asked for one commandment. He gave two in response, which leads me to one of only three possible conclusions. Either Jesus can't hear, Jesus can't count, or these two commandments are so inextricably linked that you simply cannot have one without the other. We demonstrate our love for God by reaching out to care for those around us. God's love is made real and practical and tangible as we reach out to and love our neighbor. And if you need help thinking about what that looks like, one of my favorite guides for living out that commandment is the book of James. It speaks very specifically about putting our faith into action. And I came across a great handout as I was beginning my teaching and preaching career that notes the similarities between what James has to say and what Jesus has to say. And almost every verse in the book of James is an echo of something that Jesus taught. If you have time, to take a look at that one day. I think you'll really enjoy it. I went on to pursue a master's degree in sacred theology from Drew, and after graduating, I spent a number of years at the Union Church of Seaside Park. You'll see my bike by the front door there, another great theme in my life. We could have called this from baseballs to Bibles to bikes as well, another option. Well, this is the Union Church of Seaside Park, and is formed by a Presbyterian, a Baptist, an Episcopalian, a Methodist, and a Quaker. Hallelujah indeed. I mean, these are guys you couldn't get in the same room for lunch these days, let alone decide to start a church. Each one couldn't afford their own church. The town wasn't big enough to support 5 different churches, but the founders of this church came together because they knew what you know, that what united them was stronger than what divided them. The next 7 years I spent as the associate pastor, of that church, the Hollywood United Methodist Church in California. And I tried to do a mashup of that and show you an older picture, obviously, of Hollywood United Methodist Church. Any Methodists in the house? I got some Methodists. There's my Methodist. Good. Very nice. I developed a deep love and appreciation for John Wesley and Wesleyan theology and his love of communion and this idea of prevenient grace. Boy, if grace is anything, it's prevenient. Grace comes to us before we even know it. We don't even have the power to realize or understand what God's grace is all about. And John Wesley gave that the name prevenient grace. And he even knew that what unites us is stronger than what divides us. I love what he says. He says, though we cannot think alike, may we not love alike. Though we are not of one opinion, may we not be of one heart. Without doubt we may, he says. Herein all the children of God may unite, notwithstanding our smaller differences. May we not be of one heart. That heart of love for God and for neighbor. Wesley had a great commitment to the great commandment, love of God and neighbor. He called the love of God piety, and he called the love of neighbor mercy. And HUMC was a church that lived that out very, very well, both in their worship and their Bible study. The church was also always standing up for those who couldn't stand up for themselves, giving voice to the voiceless. They would do work with the homeless, the poor, the marginalized, the oppressed, fighting hard for things like affordable housing and marriage equality and immigration rights. And 30 years ago, they were on the forefront of welcoming and advocating and supporting people who were battling HIV and AIDS. They even put a 20-foot red ribbon on the tower of their church as a beacon of hope and love and welcome for the community. And while I felt a very strong call to that particular church and their amazing ministry, I never discerned a call to the UMC as a denomination. Pastors tend to move the United Methodist Church tend to move their pastors around a lot every 3 or 4 years. And that kind of felt like I was in the draft. You know, I was much more of a free agent, and I liked kind of finding my own place and working at a place. So it began to become evident that it would be time to move home. Not before. We did a couple mission trips. It's going to be hard to see in this picture. I had some great memories in Los Angeles. Only in Los Angeles can you take a picture of your LA mission team heading to the Gulf Coast to do some relief work for Hurricane Katrina, and Hulk Hogan photobombs your picture. Hulk Hogan just kind of getting on a plane, welcome to LAX. Only in LA can you get a picture of your bike at the Batcave. That is the Batcave. That is the TV Batcave right there in LA. One of the highlights of my time in LA, however, was a 550-mile charity bike ride from San Francisco to Los Angeles. 2,000 riders I was one of the top 50 fundraisers. I raised over $20,000 for this cause. It was a great cause and literally changed my life. California was a great experience for me. The weather was not too unlike Florida, but this is going to be hard to say, especially after the winter we've had. But it gets boring. Perfect weather gets boring. And so when you start praying for cold and snow, you know it's time to come back east. Becky and I knew our friends and family were back here. Our parents were getting older. We played a job called Resume Roulette. We said whoever gets the first job wins. She had a great job as a children's ministry director and comes to Connecticut and got a job at the Congregational Church in Guilford. And I ended up at the Congregational Church of Greens Farms as the minister of faith formation. After having been trained in one denomination that I thought was a little too small and tight, and working for a decade in another tradition, we discovered that the UCC, the United Church of Christ, was a great fit for who we are and represented the best of everything we believe in. Congregational polity, built on the autonomy of the local church and respect for the individual members of the church. The early founders of Congregationalism stressed things that I think we would all hold to be true: the sufficiency of Scripture alone as a rule of faith and practice, Jesus alone as head of the church, liberty of conscience, respect for private judgment, and not a very long doctrinal checklist. And so not only did I resonate with the UCC in general, but I resonated with what the things Greens Farms Church was doing. I love to be able to preach and to teach. We, each summer, gather with a number of the local churches in the area and have an early morning Sunday service on the beach. Our Christmas Eve services are fantastic in that meeting house, if you've ever been to that meeting house. And we do this wonderful thing called Service Sunday that a number of you here might be aware. This is a picture of one of our ministry partners. This is a food pantry in Bridgeport, one of our last service days. We partner with a number of the local ministries here in Fairfield County, and we work with them throughout the year, but one Sunday a year, we show up at church, we have communion together, and then we split up into teams. Alex, how many teams on a service Sunday? How many of those ministry partners would you say we work with from time to time there? 10 to 12 ministry partners that we go and work with on a service Sunday. And what drives Greens Farms Church in part is their covenant, which says this: our fellowship is not dependent upon identity of theological opinion, but a common loyalty to Jesus and a common passion to serve the world. And I think that's a great way of saying what unites us is stronger than what divides us. It's a great paraphrase and translation of the great commandment to love God and love your neighbor. I ran into my friend Vinny while we were doing some chaplain training at Norwalk Hospital, doing something called clinical pastoral education, where we train to work and be with the patients and the staff of a hospital, irrelevant of their faith tradition, just being a presence with them, offering them unconditional care and concern. And one of the things that they hold dear is that spiritual caregivers, and I think this is exactly what you all do here as well, ease the existential anxiety that confronts those who are vulnerable and compromised, and connect patients and residents and clients and staff to the divine, and thereby contribute to their healing. And we're able to do that because we realize that what unites us is stronger than what divides us. And you guys, as the new Canaan Society, are able to do that as well. My guess is if you looked at all the different churches that are represented here, if you compared notes and doctrines from your different denominations, if you all had to believe the same thing, you wouldn't be called the New Canaan Society. You'd be called the New Canaan Societies, because you'd have to have a Methodist one and a Presbyterian one and a Catholic one, a young one and an old one. But it's one society. with a dozen or so guidelines, a common desire for deep and abiding friendship with Jesus, lasting, transparent friendships with each other, so that we might experience personal transformation. And this is a motto for our church, but it could just as well be a motto for you guys here. No matter who you are or where you are on life's journey, you are welcome here. The other thing that you guys hold dear to is this idea that your intention is to have a powerful and positive impact on families, communities, marketplace, and the world. It's almost like you got that from the Bible or something. It's a very powerful and profound mission statement. So as you guys go from this place, Dave has mentioned the Shema, I've mentioned the Shema. How do you live out the Shema? How do you take your love of God and express it in a love of neighbor? Who is your neighbor? What does loving your neighbor look like in your life? One of the things I am able to do, in addition to some of the service things and the projects, I'm able to turn some of my passion and some of my desire to help folks out into an opportunity to ride for charity. I'll be riding in my third Connecticut Challenge ride. Anybody do the Connecticut Challenge? It's a great local fundraising bike race here. This is me crossing the finish line at my first Connecticut Challenge. And I don't know if you can tell, we have little numbers on our helmet. You have to get rider numbers. And when professional riders get the number 13, they typically tend to turn it upside down. So the bad luck all just kind of drains out of it. What do you think would be the worst rider number that a pastor could get on his very first charity ride? I opened my envelope and I got the number of the beast. I tried to get it changed. I said, is there another one? This is going to be horrible. It actually turned out to be a good opportunity for me to ride and have some stories. And I'll be telling this story forever. It says 2016. I'll be telling this story forever. Gentlemen, as you go from this place, as you try to live out your faith in your families, in the marketplace, in your workplace, and in your communities, let me leave you with these final words of encouragement as a benediction. Knowing that what unites us is stronger than what divides us. Knowing that all of you have a common desire for a deep and abiding friendship with Jesus and lasting and transparent relationships with each other so that you might experience personal transformation and have a positive impact on the world around you. In the hopes of fully living out Jesus' commandment of loving God with heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loving your neighbor as yourself, let me leave you with these final words, both as a challenge and as a closing prayer. Life is short, and we do not have much time to gladden the hearts of those who travel with us. So be swift to love, make haste to be kind, and go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thank you all so much for the opportunity to be here. It's great to share this morning with you. Have a wonderful, wonderful day.